Yes, die Aufzeichnung hat gestartet. Josh, it's now your stage, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction, of which I could probably understand 5%, but some. And thanks everyone for taking the time. I know at least a couple of people on this call have an interesting festival to attend after this. And so my name is Josh, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Scite. And today, I'm going to walk you through why we created Scite, what we're hoping to do with Scite, and then how you can actually use Scite with your research. Before doing that, I generally like to kind of take a step back and acknowledge that what we do as publishers, as librarians, as researchers, as vendors, is to work with some really amazing people and amazing content. And so to me, research, not just science, is very powerful, right? It's given us the ability to have these virtual conferences. It's given us life-saving vaccines. And amazingly, I've been showing this slide pre-pandemic, pasteurization, policy research, financial research. All these things have ultimately been informed by research, and that research, is persistent. It connects over time, and I think we can sometimes lose sight of this when we're getting caught up in negotiations or peer review or kind of all the day-to-day aspects that come with this information. While research is quite amazing, there are challenges. And so there's a lot of research nowadays. There's about 2 papers coming out per minute, which I think is actually an underestimate at this point, because that's only looking at the PubMed database. And that's also some years old. And so really, I think the estimate's closer to 4, where there's 4 minutes coming out every minute on every topic. And so there's massive amounts of articles being published, and that's continually increasing year over year. And so there's a lot to keep up with. And then in addition to that, there's challenges of, is this a trustworthy, is this a reproducible finding? And so, there have been multiple initiatives in psychology, machine learning, cancer research, looking at how reproducible are findings. And the findings that we've seen from these initiatives have been that a lot of times studies are not reproducible. And so we're really trying to help researchers better understand and make research more reliable. And so we built it not just to accelerate everything, but to help with these 2 problems of information overload, and to make research more reliable, to make it more understandable. And then really since kind of starting to what I think, is to introduce the next generation of citations. And so citations, can have a negative connotation to some people, but I think to me they're quite amazing, right? They do connect ideas across disciplines, across time, across space, and so there is the prediction of gravitational waves by Einstein, and then the detection of them nearly 100 years later is connected by a citation, and so the way that I like to kind of show Scite and to show how it helps is to show the world as it exists without Scite. And before doing that, I'd like to kind of acknowledge that most of our research and most of our work is funded by grants here in the USF. So we received a large grant from the NIH to create Scite, as well as one from NSF. And so we've been working on this now for some years. And I would say we've really built something that I think is quite useful for an undergraduate student, a tenured professor, even a non-scientist ultimately. And so I would encourage you to all sign up and test Scite. You get a free week to trial it. And then obviously working, at the organizational levels, we also give free trials, month-long trials to universities. And so the way that I'll show Scite is to show you, my research without Scite, and then to show it through the lens of Scite. And then to walk you through various things that these new types of citations open up. And so when you come to a scientific paper like this, you generally look at a few different things. Immediately, your eyes go to, where is it published? Do I know this journal? Does it have a strong reputation? Is it in Cell, Nature, or Science? Is it in a journal that I trust, et cetera, et cetera? Then you'll look at the authors and also look at their affiliations and have the same kind of questions or almost judgments. And then perhaps next you'll look at metrics, right? The number of citations, views, downloads, increasingly alt metrics. And in each of these cases, these heuristics are, allowing us to kind of make a quality assessment. Do I want to read this paper? Is this something that I think will be worth my time or not? And I would say in most cases, when looking at a citation number, we're really just glancing at it, and it's a high number is good, a low number is perhaps not so good, or is maybe a new article. If, however, you click that citation number, you might come to a Scopus or a Web of Science or a Dimensions, and what you'll see pretty much looks the same across these different tools, and that is a list of the citing documents. And so in this case, there are 63 documents that have cited my work. You can scroll down if you have access to these. You can then actually maybe open 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. And so in general, we are not going to open 63 documents when we come to a single study, let alone hundreds, or even kind of a dozen. And the reason for that is that it's just simply very impractical, right? To open a document to find what it says about my article or about the article of interest takes a lot of time. And I've timed myself, trying to do this as quickly as possible. And it's, really like a minute or 2. And so it's a massive amount of work, and it would take hours or at least an hour to see what do these 63 documents say about my study. And I think that's a big missed opportunity, because behind these 63 documents is lots of time, human energy, so hours, years of work, data, evidence. There's millions, if not more than millions, of study funding behind these research. There could be very valuable criticisms. There could be very valuable interpretations. Maybe one of these 63 documents have looked at a similar or the same claim that I make. Maybe some of them have found supporting evidence in favor of that claim or contrasting evidence. And so you really just don't know that information unless maybe you have spent, PhD length levels within this field and you're reading everything almost religiously. And so that's what we want to change, is we want to make this information digestible so that it can be better used to help you understand findings, whether that's in your own field, your own study, interdisciplinary research, or really just to kind of better sift through and evaluate the literature. And so if you come back to eLife, or come back to my paper, we have a browser extension for almost every browser. So for Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Microsoft Edge, this will show up virtually anywhere you're reading a scientific article. So it'll show up on eLife, it'll show up on Elsevier articles. It shows up, even on PubMed results. It'll show up on Google results, Google Scholar results. And really, I kind of liken Scite to glasses, right? You can get through research and discover it in other ways, but when you put on the lenses of Scite, you see a lot more information. And so here it is, looking up chromosome segregation in PubMed next to each result. And you can see that, this one has 32 paper citations, 2 supporting citations, and then 34 mentioning. And then in some cases, there's differences. And so, so coming back to Scite, what this browser extension does is not just to show you these numbers that you kind of glance at, but you can click this and it will bring you over to Scite. And so what you see when you first come to Scite is that up top, we have basically the same metadata as the version of record. So titles, authors, abstract, in some cases, a link back to the full text, the ability to set an alert to receive emails for new citations, and then the ability to also look at journals as well. If you scroll down, you'll see the main kind of difference from these other tools that I just showed. And that is that we're not just showing a list of citing articles metadata, we're actually showing directly the citation context. So these 3 sentences of text, which have been extracted from the full text of the citing article. And so really it's kind of changing the superficial number or metric into a rich source of information that you can use to see what have experts, what have others in this research space said about this article that I'm reading. And will that help me better, assess it, better utilize it, write about it, et cetera. And so this first citation statement, we can read, it says, in agreement with previous work, and then cites Nicholson et al., the trisoma clone showed similar aberrations, albeit to a lesser extent, supplemental figure S2B. So presumably no one on this call has read my study, but now, in a click and really kind of a minute of time or less, we're able to see that there is a paper that is supporting, right? And so that is kind of very valuable expert insight that is there. It's just surfacing it in a way that you can understand it and discover it better. So there's a couple things that I'll point out. And I would say the primary value of Scite is the context, right? And then secondary to that, we provide a lot of different ways to filter this. So we show where that context was extracted from. So in this case, this citation was taken from the results section of this citing paper. And then we have a deep learning model that analyzes these citation statements to try to indicate, does this provide supporting or contrasting evidence? And so in total, we call these smart citations because it's providing a lot more rich information. And so you can see the context, you can see why, you can see where, and you can see, does this provide supporting information? You can also search these contexts directly. So say you are looking at chromosome segregation, but you are not looking at human cells, but in yeast. If you search the citation statements, it will match, whatever you're searching, either in the context directly or the associated metadata. And what you can see is, here's the target citation for mine. And so again, now this citation is appearing in the introduction section. And what they're saying is, since aneuploidy has been shown to cause genetic and chromosomal instability in both yeast and mammalian cells. So now, again, presumably you guys have not read my paper, but now you kind of understand the main crux of it. So that is, aneuploidy has been shown to cause genetic and chromosomal instability. So my citation is in blue, and you can see it's been cited with 3 others. And so this is a way to also discover co-citations and find related work that maybe you want to reference in your own paper, or again, kind of just help you to kind of understand this work better. And so it's not just about, has this paper received supporting or contrasting citation? It's really, here's this very rich conversation happening, backed by data, backed by peer review, in some cases, and how can we better utilize this for researchers when they're trying to sift through these mountains of papers. As I mentioned, we organize where the citations come from, and so you can filter by introduction citations if you want to maybe understand, results or discussion citations if you want to kind of see some criticisms or some more nuanced context. Or maybe you are looking at this paper because you want to repeat their methods, and you can see how others have reproduced their methods and if there's been small changes on that. And so this is, again, a citation and introduction section is very different from one in the methods section, which is also quite different from the results and discussion as well. And so you get a lot of different ways of looking at this. This gets a lot of attention, the supporting and contrasting citation statements, because I think there's an AI aspect to it. But I think what we're trying to do with the citation types was in response to growing concerns around reproducibility, and that is have others in the literature tested this claim. And so we have developed a really sophisticated a deep learning model that we spent years working on and building up a training data set to try to classify these papers as providing supporting or contrasting evidence. And so it's not perfect, and it will never be perfect because it's very difficult to look at text and say these authors are indicating that they provide support, especially scientific text. But the way that we've done it was as experts, so members of the team with PhDs or MDs, have read roughly 40,000 different citation statements across different disciplines, or across all disciplines, I should say. And then we annotated them. So we would read them and say, do these fit this criteria that it's saying that they support it and that they're providing evidence. So it's not just positive or negative sentiment. That training data has gone in to feed this deep learning model that then analyzes the citation statements at scale. And I would say it's necessary to have this if you want to do any automated citation typing, just because of the pure volume of documents. And that is, we're now dealing with over 1 billion of these citation statements, something that has grown a lot since we first started. And so how do we do it is maybe a question that is on some minds of people listening. And what does that kind of look like? So let me see. So coming back, so there's a couple of challenges here. So the first one is how do you get access, right? So as some librarians may know, research is not just, you can't just go grab all of research and download it. And so most of our content is not actually open. We started with open access content, but to date, we've now partnered with over 24 different, leading publishers across all different disciplines. From these publishers, we are getting their full text, either as in PDF form or XML. and then we're processing it. And so to date, we've analyzed nearly 30 million full text articles and have extracted and analyzed over 1 billion citation statements from these, which means we have information on almost 50 million articles in this new way of looking at citations. And so the first challenge is getting access to it. And in some cases, we don't have access to the full text, and I'll show you what we do when we do then. The second step is, once you have access, most content is still in the form of a PDF, especially if you go pre-2000, let alone, an article from the Royal Society in 1890. And so PDF is notoriously difficult to text mine. And it's especially difficult in scientific literature because there's a lot of, funny notation, right? There's math, there's, all these different things. There's chemical notation, et cetera. And so we have a lot of machine learning that goes into identifying the in-text citation in the PDF. And this is a visual representation of the actual tool working. Take that in-text citation, which can appear as a superscript, can appear as a number in brackets and in parentheses. It can appear in names like this. So there's a lot of different ways this in-text citation can be represented. We have to identify that. We then have to take that information and reliably and efficiently match it to the reference in the reference list. Again, the reference list can have variable degrees of information and a lot of different formatting. So some can, have every author name, some can have only 2, some can have a DOI in the reference list. We then take that information, that reference string, and then match that against metadata from Crossref or DataCite. And so this pipeline really is taking, PDFs and XML from all these different publishers, open access sources, and processing them every day, actually. And so that is, a big challenge. And again, it's not perfect, but I would say it's quite good. And so if you want to actually, look at this in much more detail, if you come to Scite and go to the resources, we ourselves published a paper on this back in November of 2021, describing exactly how Scite works, the limitations of this. This is what the pipeline looks like, the precision, the recall of the deep learning model, et cetera. And so I think, while it's not perfect, it's exceedingly good. And we have by far the largest collection of citation statements, in the world. Sorry if you can hear my dog bearing his toy. So coming back to Scite, and I would say, please feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A as we're going, just so they're not lost. And I can even pause to take some of them, so I'm just not talking at you the whole time. But coming back to Scite, so I mentioned, we work with many publishers and we have a lot of articles. Most of them are even not open at this point. What do we do when we don't have a full text article, and how do we account for that? And so here is, an article that we've extracted citation statements. This is also a difference in our system, is that a paper can cite another paper one time in passing the introduction. It could also cite it 10 times throughout the paper. And those are very different types of citations that, again, is lost in how we traditionally view citations. And so looking at the incidence of citation statements is also something we're taking a look at to try to identify kind of passive versus engaged citations. If we don't have access to full text and we can't extract out the citation information, what we show is a traditional citation that looks like this. And so in combination with traditional citations, we are very comprehensive at this point. I'd say our numbers are basically the same, on par, if not better than, Web of Science or Scopus or Dimensions, depending upon the field. And we really are working to try to, go beyond just saying, here's a citation paper, to gain access to this, to extract out the citation information from that. And so this is, a way of looking at the individual article. And coming back here, I showed you that you can search these citation statements. You can filter by paper section, citation types. You can also look at how this looks over time. These green color on the histogram is for when I received supporting citation. And so you can see sometimes there's a bit of a lag. You can filter by article types. Some hospitals, some pharma companies are really interested in looking at, is there research being cited in practice guidelines? And so this helps you do that, but it also helps you filter in more granular ways. We identify self-citations versus independent citations. You can see which journals are citing this work the most. And so maybe you've found a study that is integral to yours and you want to figure out where to submit. These would be relevant places for me to submit related research to mine. You can also see who is citing this work. And again, you can select them and see exactly what they're saying in this case as well. You can, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I got a quick question. Related to the thing that you showed us on the previous slide, where you talked about what you do in case there's no citation statement. Do you have a rough idea of the coverage? So how many of the citations you actually have access to the full text?
Yeah, so I think our estimates is like there's like a 70 million kind of full text that we could get actual citation information from, and we have 30 million. And so Elsevier is a big one that we're missing. And so we have all of Elsevier's references. We have probably millions of their articles. We don't have all of them though. And so that's a large one. The other limitation in our system is that articles need to have a digital object identifier to appear in there. And so Archive, just started assigning DOIs to their content, and they went back, but a year ago they weren't. And so we were missing a lot of that information, and we might be missing some, in other cases. And so I would say it's very good, but obviously the longer term is to work through all of these and gain access. And we do have some big indexing agreements that are still in the works. And so yeah, again, maybe many people on this call know publishers are not just giving away everything for you to text mine. And so it's a long-term, goal. And I think one thing that has really helped is, other publishers, kind of signing on with us. And one aspect of this is not just to be this interesting startup on the side doing this, but is to really work with the publishers to display this information on the version of record. And so we're now live on the Proceedings of National Academy of Science, where you can see they have their traditional citation still shown, but then they also show our information. And then we've also actually done some retraction work, because retraction data is messy, and there's also somewhat of a monopoly on it, which I don't think should exist. Yeah, so it's a really good question, and I would say there's big publishers that I really want to work with, and I think it'll be time, or we have to go to the editors and kind of have this bottoms up pressure, because it's not, they're not used to giving it away for free in many cases. So thanks a lot for that. Yeah, so continuing with this. So this is, a new way of looking at an article. We provide various filters and an ability to search through this. We have the ability to visualize these citations. Some people really love this. If you're a visual person, some people like me find the report much more valuable. Either way, it is quite pretty. What you'll see here is my article in the middle. And so this node, and you can see a couple things, that is arrows coming into my article and arrows going out of it. And so really, again, like kind of utilizing this conversation, you can see how my work is built off of others and how others build off my work. And the thing is that you don't have to just say, okay, this is supporting, I trust it. You can click on that edge and see exactly what it says. So you can see how these two papers talk to each other. The size of the node relates to the number of citations. The green node indicates a supporting one. The blue indicates contrasting. By default, we actually hide mentioning sites, because if you show them, it starts to get pretty messy. But you can choose to show them if you want, and you can also choose to show this information in different layouts. And so again, this is work that I reference, all these arrows coming out of my paper, and then this is work that reference mine. You can hide these things and look at this. And again, choose different layouts that might be interesting to look at this. Maybe that one's not so good. Let's come back here. And so this is a powerful way to kind of look at this as a visual representation, to maybe make a figure. And then to go from that, you can also expand these things. So if you select a node and say, I'm interested in Nicholson et al., I'm also really interested in Upender. What you could do is select that node, and then there's a little plus sign next to this. If you click this, it'll start to expand out the network. And you can continue to do this until the machine starts to kind of grind to a halt, to really see, a network of papers that I might be interested in. And so I think this is, again, some people love visualizations. I personally find the report more useful. I think this will be quite powerful when we do a bit more work and can allow you to look at not just maybe 3 papers, but dozens, because then you can really see these are the main points of intersection amongst this group of papers that I'm interested in. And so this is, a way of looking at the same report that I just showed in the visual representation. And then if you're an author, you can sign up, claim your papers, and see your own articles in this visual representation as well. And so coming back to Scite, this I would say is kind of our atomic unit of Scite, is this information. So showing the citation context, the title, where it comes from, and then a type. One thing, I guess, before going on is, I mentioned that the tool is not perfect. I do think it's critical that you can see the citation context itself. We then also show you the confidence that the model has in making that assessment. And if you read it and it still looks wrong, you yourself as a user can say, this doesn't look like it's supporting, it looks like it's just mentioning. That's then sent to the back end, and two humans review it blindly and accept it or reject it. And if they accept it, it will change from supporting confidence 93 to whatever the correct one is to expert classified. And so that's here's an example of that. So that's pretty critical because 9 times out of 10, when you show this to researchers, they search themselves. And if you're saying this paper has been challenged, they may not like this. One thing I would say, though, is we're not trying to be inflammatory and place blame on people. And one thing that I found, anecdotally, is I really trust researchers that contrast themselves. So citations that are contrasting, because it shows that they're not just trying to put out this perfect trophy of a study, they're really trying to get to the answer. And so I think this is, going to require some cultural, understanding and change from the community to start to understand and utilize these types of citations. And some people can, have maybe a negative reaction to, okay, this is AI trying to classify me and classify my work. And so this is, this everything is kind of built around this data, is discovering it. And so what we've allowed from that is, not just to look at individual articles, but you can click on researchers' names and you can look at their affiliations and their citation record and publication record. This was an undergrad in our lab who later got a PhD at UCSF. You can see how they've been cited, but also how they cite others. And we built something really kind of fun off this, which is basically looking at a play on Spotify Wrapped. So Spotify, the music provider, every year will provide you this analysis of how you listen to music. You were the first one to listen to this. You listen to this the most. We've done that with papers. And you sign up, you claim it, and it's pretty fun because it'll show you, here's the topics you talk about at parties. And my topics are bibliometrics and chromosome segregation and cancer, which, sadly, or maybe not sadly, is what I actually talk about at a lot of parties. And so, again, there's more than just receiving citations. There's also how you make them, how many preprints, and we're trying to provide a lot more color around that. So you can click on researchers' names. You can set alerts if you are, interested in this researcher's work, and you'll receive emails or feed notifications for that. You can also click on affiliations, and this you can click from a profile or a report, and you can see that information in aggregate. And so here is Virginia Tech. This might not be perfect, but it's as best as we can do with publicly available information. We identify the total number of articles, the breakdown of these citation types, and then editorial notices. And so then you can click and see, which papers have been retracted, withdrawn, et cetera. And then something that we call the Scite index. Again, there's a little bit of point of contention around this. It's just a simple ratio, though, and that is, looking at supporting citations over supporting plus contrasting citations. So is there overall more supporting or less? And this is really fascinating to look at if you look at across disciplines. Because it's not the same. And so here is, coming back here. Here is some data, some analysis that we did actually back in 2019, where we looked at, again, the Scite index. So simple ratio, supporting over supporting plus contrasting. We looked at this across the impact factor. Do high impact factor journals have, a lot of supporting citations? And what we saw was that there's not a strong relationship here. But if you break this down by subject area, you do start to see some pretty big differences. And so again, here's this spread of all these journals. Each dot is a journal. And then if you look at math, there's a lot of supporting citations, not a lot of contrasting. And I think that relates in two parts. One, the nature of the discipline. So there's only so much you can contrast, a mathematical equation. And then, also potentially how researchers write. And so I think, to really look at how researchers write across disciplines and the nature of disciplines, and actually look at that empirically, takes a lot of work. It means we'd have to manually annotate a lot of citations from each of these different disciplines and then test our model out of these things. And so I think it's a bit of a mixture. And you can see this difference across different disciplines, looking at, math versus, clinical research. And again, I wouldn't say that this is a bad thing and we should all try to be like math. I think it's very healthy to have debate in research, and we want to surface that debate, make it easier to find, and maybe encourage people to actually, debate more. Because if you noticed on this dashboard, what you can see is not, contrasting citations are quite rare, right? Almost like 8 to 1. And I think that is an accurate reflection. I think it's also that we're not just looking at positive or negative sentiment. There are limitations to our tool as well, right? It has to be, picked up in this citation context. But, in general, like, you are not rewarded for coming out and saying your peer is wrong. And so researchers, tend to not do that. Oftentimes, if they do it, that it's really, a necessary thing. And so this is, looking at our view of citations and then taking that to the citation to the affiliation record. You can see how this looks at over time. We intentionally don't try to rank universities, but you can look at journals ranked. If you scroll down, go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting again.
No, I appreciate it. So I'm not talking at everyone for an hour.
This is super fascinating. I'm sucking up every word you're saying. It's very interesting. So I was wondering, have you cross-checked your contrasting measure with the retractions? So is it that the retractions?
So we did not. Someone did recently, and they also looked at pub peer, and so there's a paper on Scite as well. So they looked at pub peer comments, they looked at retraction comments. We also have a bot, a Twitter bot, that does something around this, called the Scite ref check. And so I don't think there's a strong correlation as a short answer. I also think retractions by some publishers are really hard to see. And so we have a bot that tweets out every time there's a new citation to a paper post retraction, right? And so 11 hours ago, there's this paper that cited a paper that was retracted in 2010. And that happens a lot because we download PDFs, we save them, we add them to a reference manager, and then maybe years later, we actually are referencing it. And so it's hard to keep up with this information. And as I'll show you, one of our tools is aimed at kind of addressing this and trying to integrate into reference managers. And so I think, that's the other thing that people test is they go to them, search themselves. They then go to Wakefield and say, okay, Wakefield should have all these contrasting citations. And they'll sometimes say it's not working because there's 1,000 citations and there's only like a dozen contrasting. And again, this is a challenge for us as some user educations that it's not enough to be negative. Right? We're not classifying, I hate this study. It would be, I have to hate this study because our data shows it's different or something. And so it's really looking at, a lot of people have discussed the Wakefield study critically, but not hundreds of groups have, refuted it. And so we want to have this higher bar because, we're not trying to look at opinion. We're really trying to look at, supporting and contrasting evidence. So please do keep the questions coming. It's much more exciting for me too. So continuing down, looking at this aggregate information at the affiliation level, you can see who's published in this area or this group. You can click on any of their names and see that. Scrolling down, you can see the most supported article. Maybe you want to find, let's try this. Maybe you want to find, papers that have more than 0 contrasting citations and you want to see the most recent one. You can do this. You can also download this information in CSV if you want to work with it somewhere else.
How confident are you regarding this author disambiguation?
So the author disambiguation is not, so the amazing thing is like, we haven't had to do everything from scratch, right? So there's big initiatives that work on this. And so Crossref, for example, is where we get a lot of our metadata. And so that's publisher provided. Maybe you just saw null at all. And so not everything's perfect. And there's a lot of, really messy metadata. If you go and search kind of the most recent article in some fields, you'll get these future articles, as I call them, because they're from like 21, 22. And I'm like, okay, so it's 100 years in the future. And that's just messy metadata. And so we do a lot of work to kind of clean this up. I would say the author, at least the information is, we're fairly confident it's as good as what publishers have. For the self-citation information, we're also pretty conservative. So self-citations is kind of like this 80-20 problem. Like it's pretty easy to get 80% of the way. That last 20% gets very hard with names like G et al. And so we'd rather be really confident saying this is, a self-citation than not. And so this information, these affiliations, if you come to product, you can look at journals. You can look up any journal you want. You can organize this table. You can click through and you can look at, Nature, Science, or you can filter in these different ways and say, I want to look at maybe cell biology, here's Cell, there's JCB, et cetera. You can also do this for organizations. So if you want to look at different universities, also different companies, you can do that here. And again, this is provided by a lot of other organizations organizing that metadata, and then us providing, our unique kind of way of looking at this. This also exists for funders as well. As I mentioned, though, this is based on publicly available information. It's not perfect. And so maybe you're at a university and you curate this very well. And so we allow groups to actually upload information directly from their reference manager, whether that's Zotero or Mendeley, and I should probably go a bit quicker now, or just to simply copy and paste a list of DOIs. There is a limit of 1,000, but if you email us, we can bump that up. And so we have some universities looking at 25,000 plus DOIs to look at their affiliation. That will then look just like what you saw for the previous dashboards. You can also create this, directly within Scite. And so we have two searches, which is a bit confusing, and we're actually bringing them together. The first search is very similar. Never type in talk. Very similar to like a PubMed or other things. So if you search chromosome disaggregation, it's matching based on title and abstract. So it matches 856 results. Maybe you want to see, highly supported papers that will narrow this down. Maybe you want to see who matches that criteria. You can then see who fits whatever criteria you deem to be important. Don Cleveland has a lot. He's a National Academy member. If you wanted to maybe find, more junior researchers, you could restrict this to more recent papers. Maybe hit search. That will then further narrow it down. And again, you'll start to see more researchers. You can see where they come from. And so this is a powerful way of, searching through the literature, and you can create a dashboard just like I showed you. And I'm not going to do that just to save a bit of time, and turn on email alerts, or you can save a search to, again, turn on alerts via email or via Scite. And so we have a feed now that is almost like kind of an academic Twitter, because these are Twitter-sized types of information. The other search, which I saved, and I'll spend a bit more time on, is really quite unique. And so this takes advantage of our data in a way that, other tools can't. And so here we are allowing a user to search over 1 billion. So this number is actually out of date, 1 billion citation statements on almost anything. And so it's, say you're writing an essay on Williamsburg rent rise, and this is where I live. You can search that. And what you can see here is almost, sometimes the answers that you're looking for. And so this is saying rents in one part, Bedford Avenue rose by 224% between this time period, and another part between by 158%. So this comes from this paper, and you can see it's been supported itself, and then you can add it to a dashboard, or you can save the full text. If you want to look up, an antibody that you just spent $300 or $400 on, you can search that. You can search it by the name, you can search it by the ID number, and you get to see here's how all these different papers use that antibody. And that can be critical into actually having the experiment, which can take a day or two, work, right? The correct dilution, the correct blocking agents matter a lot in terms of, this type of research. You can even search, Scite and see how is the literature mentioned Scite. And so here it's talking about, different papers where they've talked about Scite as well. One of my favorite kind of searches is looking at citences. So what we're calling smart citations, other groups called citences or citation sentences, a mixture of this. And there's some pretty interesting work looking at citences versus abstracts. And what they find is this type of information can provide a lot more information than just looking at abstracts. And you can even see that, there's some more recent work on this as well. And so from this, say you are interested in Oktoberfest. If you search this, you get 263 results. Who is writing the most on Oktoberfest? You can expand the author list, which shouldn't take this long, and see here's these researchers that are publishing the most on Oktoberfest. If you click any of their names, you then see exactly what they're saying. You can see how this looks over time. You can filter this by section. So maybe you want to look at, the results section. You can see where this information is being discussed. And so this makes sense to me, International Journal of Hospitality. And what you can also do from this is generate, a nicely formatted executive summary or a PDF based on this. And we're going to soon expand that to PowerPoints. And the idea here is to give you kind of this snapshot of information related to any topic that you're interested in, whether that's Oktoberfest, Williamsburg rent rise, this antibody. And what you'll see here is, we identified 263 expert analyses and opinions, citation statements. You can see how this looks like over time. You can see who's publishing the most on this, who has the most supported work on this, and you can oftentimes see some differences there, where they're coming from, and then what is being said about this, right? So these are the most relevant papers. It's talking about, I don't know, case study of L2 Icelandic in the wild. This one's looking at, impacts of Oktoberfest, and it looks like in maybe Brazil or in Portugal. And so, this is a way to kind of see, I'm starting this topic, or maybe there's a topic I don't know, maybe you're a librarian and you want to give this to a patron. This is a powerful way to kind of look at almost any topic and see that at a nice snapshot. Coming back to Scite, and then I'll try to stop, so we can have some conversations. The other thing that I showed you was, that papers can cite work post retraction. And so here is, if you're signed in, here's a feed that I have tracking. You can see I track Scopus and other things like this. You can look at your metrics, your publications, your bio, your dashboards, your reference checks, your saved searches, things like this. And then here's, a quick look at metrics. You can see I've received no citations from Nobel laureates, which is just kind of a fun one that we show in there. But we have another tool that's aimed at helping you, kind of look at your references. So things that have not been published yet. And so the reference check allows you to upload a document that you're working on, or a document that maybe you're reviewing, or a document that you're collaborating on, to see, are these references sound? Are they what I think they are? And so looking at this paper, Frontiers in Psychology, this was published in November of 2020. We're going to download this PDF. And then we're going to come back to Scite, go to the reference check and upload this. And again, this doesn't have to be a published document. It can be, a manuscript in progress, or it can be an internal document. It does need to look somewhat like a paper, though. And so here we're giving kind of the power to an individual that we do with millions of documents. So automatically identifying those in-text citations, matching that to the reference, and then matching that against our data. And this will allow you to look at the references that I'm using. Are they what I think they are? Are there other things that I'm missing, et cetera? And so from this one, we identify 41 references. We extract some metadata from it. And here you can see that, if there is one that has an editorial concern, we'll flag that as red if it's a retraction. And we'll also bump that to the top because we think that's something worth checking out. So you can see this paper from 2020, published in Frontiers, is citing something that was retracted in 2013. And maybe some of you recognize this name. This is Diederik Stauble, who had, I think, 24 or so papers retracted from fraud. So maybe that's okay, because maybe they're discussing the fraud and saying, this is a fraudulent study. And so you can open up this reference statement and see exactly how this was used. And so you can see that there's no indication that they're aware of the fraud. So they say, second, life satisfaction can be influenced by objective social context through a more unconscious path with little conscious attention or monitoring. And so this is a paper that's been retracted for nearly a decade, being cited as if it's still sound, despite it being, a retracted fraudulent study. And as I showed you on Twitter, that happens not a lot in terms, relatively speaking, but frequently. And I think that can really change the interpretations of the study in some cases. And so that's pretty binary and black and white, shouldn't happen. In other cases, here's another reference, right? This one has 106 papers citing it, 4 supporting citation statements, and 2 contrasting. This does not mean this is a bad reference. It has a contrasting citation. You shouldn't use it. But if you and your collaborators have spent months or years doing this research, writing it up, it's pretty quick to check, what do these other papers, how do they cite the same reference that I'm using, right? Are they interpreting the same way? Is there something I missed? Or do these contrasting citation statements actually change my view, and maybe I want to address that, or maybe I no longer trust it and I want to remove it? And so this is a powerful way to help individuals look at, supporting, contrasting findings to see this information. And really, it's up to the user to determine, is the fact that this is, contradictory finding, does that mean you just want to address that, or do you no longer trust it and maybe you want to cite these? And so it's showing all this information and again, trying to surface it in a way that's digestible for users to understand. The last thing that I'll show is that we also have the ability with our browser extension to not just look at published articles, but to look at claims. And so this is a personal example of my own research, or not my own research, a personal example of mine, where there's this new preprint that came out. So it was not peer reviewed. It was massively amplified by Eric Topol, who has 640,000 followers, hundreds of retweets, 1,000 plus likes, making a pretty big claim back, in September 29th, when the world was still kind of in a frenzy. And I would say it still is in some sense. And this obviously doesn't have citations. It had just been published at that point. And so what we've allowed groups to do is to highlight, if you have our browser extension, to highlight any phrase or claim, and then right-click it, and then search that against our data. And so that's what I did, because this one had 9 references in it, 1 figure. It looked kind of hastily put together. And so I said, there must be something out there. And so if you search this, you'll start to find studies looking at these differences. And now there's a lot more literature, but at the time, you didn't have to go too far until you found a paper that actually found contrasting evidence. And so here is, waiting for the punchline. Here is a paper that actually found a difference. So it's another preprint actually that looked at a different test between vaccinated healthcare workers and unvaccinated healthcare workers. And so these are not connected by citations, but they're both relevant. And so this is a way to kind of look at claims, facts, and figures, and you can use that, whether you're reading the New York Times, you're on Twitter, or even actually, on Facebook, anywhere the browser anywhere you're online, you can search against this. And so it's a good way to kind of find relevant studies, see what experts say about anything. It's also pretty fun to try to break. Oktoberfest was me searching right before this. You can look up dog flatulence and you'll find debates. You can look up, drugs and diseases and serious things and find, quickly utilize the information in kind of a novel way. And so I'm going to stop there because I've been talking a lot, and I would love more questions or feedback, and happy to go deeper on any of those things as well. I would say if you have yeah.
Thanks a lot, Josh. So let's see if our audience has questions or any remarks.
And thank you for those questions, by the way, Leo. It's nice. It's also nice to see people's faces.
Then I will continue if there's no one else. So Josh, again, this is really, really fascinating and very interesting. I myself am a social science researcher, so I'm more looking at the social science research side than the librarian side. I was wondering if you have an API that is available for research to make use of this great data.
So we do, and it's pretty open actually. So you don't need tokens. So if you go to api.scite.ai, you can find the documentation on that. Some things are restricted, but in general, the tallies are there. We also make our badge freely available for other products, personal web pages, repositories, and so some universities have added this. And one thing that we've done just very recently is not just to show the citations like this, but to show it by section. So some publishers are hesitant to show a contrasting citation. And so we've given the ability for groups to show citations broken down by section, or you could do both if you really like. and you can customize these things. We also work with researchers, and so if the API is not, accommodating, just send us an email. We can do some custom things and provide data dumps if it's maybe easier than like these massive queries. And I'm personally fascinated by that, and I think if I wasn't doing webinars and trying to sell all the time, that's what I'd be doing. But we have to keep the lights on somehow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this explanation answered the question of Mr. Spielberg. He's asking, is there an API for uploading and analyzing own documents?
So we have this reference check, which I showed, and you can use it by just dragging and dropping a PDF. You can also use the reference check API. And so we think this will actually only get adopted at scale if it's integrated into submission systems. And so it is actually. And so it's live and some journals are already using it. It hasn't been the most quickly adopted thing by journals because I think it's a little confusing as to where does it come in. Right? The authors clearly find value. Do the peer reviewers also find value? Yes and no. What about the editors? And is this another thing that is already adding to a quite lengthy submission process? And so that is integrated in Manuscript Manager. It was integrated on Scholar One. There are some journals testing it on the side, and so you can utilize this reference check API. That one does require a token though, because that is not something that is free. But if you're doing this for research purposes, we're definitely happy to kind of discuss that with you.
Any other questions, please?
Yeah, I mean, as a reminder, you can sign up without putting in a credit card or anything. You get a week for free, and so you could do that. We want people to test it. And then, we'd love to work with universities to bring this to researchers. One thing that I can also mention is that, we're not just trying to be another Web of Science or Scopus. We did make that comparison, but there's really a lot of new use cases here for new users. Quite surprisingly, even to me, is that a lot of undergraduates use Scite. And so if you go on TikTok, which I was not on, there's tons of videos of students using Scite and for TikTok. And or on TikTok. And I think what they're using it for is that it helps them understand, right? So here's this paper they've been assigned to write an essay on, so not a publication. They get to see what have experts said about this? How have they interpreted it? And in some cases, for a critical analysis type essay that they've been assigned, they can already see here's two sides of the story, and then that's all referenced. And so I think that's, one thing that I would emphasize is that this is quite different from these other tools, which I think are used primarily by administrators and bibliometricians. This can really be used in a day-to-day basis by even undergrads. And, ultimately, I would say kind of the public, if we get there one day, because, it provides digestible, understandable information tied to actual evidence and data. And I think that's, something that's been lacking. Any other questions? Cool.
So
okay.
If there are any other questions, I'll stop recording now.